Hello, are you going to say anything first, Lacey? Sorry.
Yes, I'm just going to start by introducing myself and you, and I'm going to do a land acknowledgement as well. So first, hello everyone. Welcome to the Discoverability Network's presentation on disclosure and accommodations. My name is Lacey Fontaine. I'm a career advisor at George Brown College, and I'm so happy to be hosting our guest today. We have Lisa Kelly joining from the Discoverability Network, who's going to walk us through this conversation. Before we get started, I'd like to, sorry, there you go. Oh, it's not working. Okay. Here we go. I'd like to acknowledge that George Brown College is located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and other Indigenous peoples who have lived here over time. We are grateful to share this land as treaty people who learn, work, and live in the community and with each other. We acknowledge that these land statements are only a first step in reconciliation and decolonizing the education and professional space. And I personally am committing to continue educating myself on decolonizing practices within my work and within my George Brown community. So with that said, again, welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us today. And please go ahead.
Great. So my name is Lisa Kelly. I work as a programs manager with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. For those of you who have no idea what that is, hopefully you do, but if you're not aware, we're a over 100-year-old organization. It's a network of local chambers of commerce and board of trade, over 157 of those, representing 60,000 businesses across Ontario. So we like to, we're the indispensable partner of business. And we try to create programs and advocate on behalf of business to encourage a healthy, economy and a healthy Ontario. So as part of that, we created the DiscoverAbility Network. So you'll see that logo on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what DiscoverAbility does, but it's basically trying to help Ontarians become more accessible. Ontario businesses become more accessible and inclusive of people with disabilities. So we will go through that. You'll also note that this program is funded by the Government of Canada, and we're very appreciative of that. Now, generally, I do my own land acknowledgement, but because Lacey's done such a great job on that, I'll also acknowledge that, I think it's really important that we continue to educate ourselves and remember in whose footsteps we're following and whose lands we're on. Personally, whenever I walk outside, I live in the region of Toronto. I work in the region of Toronto. This is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's just such an incredible reminder that they cared for this land since time immemorial. So what I thought we'd talk about today is tell you a little bit about what discoverability is, because if you're a person with a disability like I am, or you're a career counselor or someone who's eventually going to work in a profession that supports people with disabilities, or perhaps you're a business owner, this topic should be of interest to you because it's really about how do we learn what changes we can make to our business to make it accessible and inclusive of everyone, from customers, potential employees, current employees, vendors, it's really everybody. So a big part of that is disclosure. So we'll talk about what that is, how people make a decision on whether or not they should disclose, what's the process, and I'll even give you a few tips on how to disclose. You can choose to ignore them, but as someone who has disclosed frequently and often, I bring both my background as an employment counselor and somebody who works with businesses, as well as a person with lived experience of disability. And finally, we'll end by talking about accommodations, which are the natural outflow of a lot of pieces of disclosure. Okay, let's talk about what the Discoverability Network is. I think it's a very cool program. I hope you will all join the network. It's free. You can join at discoverability.network, the website, and you sign on as either a job seeker or a business. And you can access on that account a free job matching platform. Now, our platform's a little different in that it connects businesses that wish to hire diverse candidates directly to those candidates, and in particular, people with disabilities. So it's a safe, non-searchable website where you can connect based on your job preferences, your skills, and the experiences that you bring. We also offer free training. So it's not enough to simply say, I want to hire somebody. Even if you're just hiring from the general candidate pool, you want to be able to know what you need to do to send messages and support an inclusive and accessible Ontario. So we provide free training to businesses, job seekers with a disability, and community partners like George Brown College, but also employment service providers. And it's really, we'll train on anything related to disability and employment related issues. And if we're not the experts in it, we'll bring someone in. So just an hour ago, we had Erin Bearless joining us to talk about, the law and the AODA and human rights as it applies to disability employment. So you can learn about those trainings by visiting us at Eventbrite. And finally, on our website, you can find curated information. If you're part of our newsletter, we'll send you updates on networking events. So we're trying to make this a benefit for everybody who is a partner in our organization. That's what our website looks like, but in a month, I'll have a new image up by the end of the month. But you can connect to over 1,500 businesses who want to hire candidates with a disability. If you have any questions about signing up, you can reach out to us through our website and we'll answer questions for you. To get started, you're simply going to go to the bright yellow button on the upper right-hand corner of the website. Self-identify as a person with a disability so that you can be matched to exclusive job offers. And remember, we do keep your information confidential. You decide who you're going to share that information with, which is a big part of disclosure, which is what we're here to talk about today. So this is just a testimonial from someone who recently signed up and within a month was matched to 30 jobs. They applied for 5 and received 2 interview offers and 1 job offer. You can also access our Lumina personality assessment. It's a free assessment that helps you identify strengths and qualities you can use in your job search. Get a big, long 7 or 8 page report that outlines a lot of, actually gives you great language on strengths and weaknesses and some other attributes that you might list in your job search, perhaps when composing interview questions or even for use on your resume, all for free. Okay, so let's talk about disclosure. So when we're job searching for anybody really, but for people with a disability, there will be different places that we look, different tools that we use, but for people with a disability, the disclosure piece, do I tell someone that I have a disability? It can weave itself through all these different topics. So for instance, what tools you use? Well, you might decide that, you're better suited to do, to create some assessments to find out where there might be more opportunity or gaps. So the Lumina. How and where you look for jobs. So again, you might join Discoverability because you know that you're more likely to be matched to an inclusive organization. You might also work with a service provider who supports people with disabilities. Definitely at some point, you're going to have to think about if, and it isn't if because it is your decision, you want to share that you have a disability, either, in preparation for an interview, after an interview, before a job offer, after a job offer, or at any point in a job. So you can be like me and wait till you get hired to disclose, or wait till you're very old to disclose. But it can affect your job search because if you need to do things differently or you need changes in the workplace, it's probably to your benefit to ask for accommodations, and that means that you would need to disclose. So if you need changes so that you can do the job, I really want you to consider whether or not this is an option for you. Always up to you though. So let's just quickly glance through some of these tools. So the common ones are your story. Some people call it a 30-second summary or an elevator pitch. Not a big fan of either of those, so I simply say it's your job search story. Are you going to mention it in your resume, in your cover letter? And have you told your references? And if your references are aware you have a disability, do they know whether you prefer to keep that private or you prefer them to share it? So those all have implications. Are there also gaps, for instance, that are related to our disability? Perhaps we've spent some time navigating barriers that might have been better used getting a job, but because you faced more barriers that have needed to be overcome, you have more gaps, or it took you longer to complete education, in which case you might need to construct or have George Brown Career Services, who are excellent, by the way, help you with your resume. The next big set of tools, I mean, there's more than I'm listing here, but these are generally the big ones, are when you network, which simply means talking to people, when you interview, when you have informational interviews and you meet with people to learn more about, a career or somebody's job search or certain sectors, and whether or not you're going to get a mentor. Disclosure and disability can also impact all those tools. Again, are you going to disclose when you're networking? Are you going to disclose when you're interviewing? And if you do, are you sure you're ability focused? So one of the things I often tell people when they're job searching is you need to be as confident about your abilities as you are talking about your disability, because people are going to hire you for your abilities. Okay, the fact that you have a disability, no one's going to hire you specifically for that, or it's probably rare, but you will be hired for your abilities to do the job. So you need to be as conversant with what you do well as you do about the barriers that you face. I also often recommend for people with disabilities that you find a mentor who has a similar disability and use them to talk about what challenges you might potentially face, what barriers, and what are some of the things that they've found have worked to overcome those barriers, or how to deal with some of those challenges you might encounter. Of course, having a mentor in your field is also great. It'd be ideal if it was the same person, but if not, you could always have a mentor in your field and a mentor with a similar disability. Social media is a big one, okay, and portfolios to a lesser extent. But are you disclosing on social media? Because businesses do and employers do background checks generally on social media usage. What tone are you using? Okay, and it's okay, you can use any tone you want, that's your choice. But if you're job searching and you're having a very sharp tone, or you're being super critical of a business and then you go to apply there, they may have differing opinions about how you'd fit in with their culture, or whether you'd be a culture ad and somebody that they'd want to hire. So you just need to be aware of that. And also, are you unintentionally disclosing or sharing information? That often happens. Like I use multiple forms of social media all the time. I'm constantly talking about disabilities, so I'm pretty sure even if I didn't disclose publicly, people could look at my social media feeds and very quickly realize I have a very heartfelt commitment to disability, and probably could assume that that's either for personal reasons or that I also have a disability myself. So you might unintentionally be disclosing. Also be aware when you're on some platforms, people can always copy and share and then reshare it out to the broader world. So if you're disclosing, for instance, on Facebook, somebody could take a snapshot of a post and then repost on behalf. So you need to be very conscious of that if you decide that you don't want to disclose. And finally, where you look. So discoverability is, unique that you're going to be matched to opportunities with employers that are actually looking to hire people. But we should also think again, when we apply to jobs, do we want to disclose? There's often a little box that says, do you belong to any of these equity seeking or equity deserving groups? Quick tip, they are not doing that to exclude you. They are doing that to help opt in and possibly reach out to you directly to help you navigate the employment pathway. Okay, it's not to screen you out in general. Okay. So let's get right into it. So what is, if disclosure could affect all these job search tools, what is disclosure? Well, the simplest definition, I think, comes from some research done out of Holland Bloor Review. It's excellent. Vanessa Tomas and Sally Lindsay and H. Ahmed. And they said that disability is when you tell others that you have a disability or a health condition. You can use whatever terminology you want for that. But it's basically you're telling someone in the workplace that you have a disability or health condition. And that could be the extent of the disclosure. I've done that in the past. You don't have to say anything else. You could say, I currently don't need an accommodation. I just wanted to let you know. Or more commonly, you might ask for changes in the workplace so that you can do your job. And those changes are called accommodations. So generally when we disclose, it's either because we want to feel authentic or give the employer a heads up, or more likely because we need something changed so that we're able to do our job or be more effective. Disclosure is not sharing your diagnosis or personal medical details. So this is not part of disclosure. So when I disclose myself, I might say, hi, I'm Lisa Kelly. I have a disability. I may require noise canceling headsets if we're in an open concept office. Simple as that, okay? But I don't say what my disability is, and I'm certainly not going to tell them about treatment regimes or, past experiences or private information that they're not entitled to. People with disabilities are often unwilling to disclose in general. And it's, I think, because they fear negative repercussions. In fact, a study, Secret and Big News by Kate Nash out of the UK, the United Kingdom, found that 60% of people with a disability said that they were unwilling to disclose any information related to a disability. That's a really big number. Because if those people require changes or, just to build a relationship with their boss or improve or explain something, if they need to do that and they're unwilling to even mention it, that's a big gap. That's a really big barrier when you're trying to succeed and build a career in the workplace. I will say from an employer's point of view, because I work with a lot of employers, providing an accommodation means knowing that there's a barrier out there. So the employer is not going to know just by looking at you. The employer is not going to know, even if you have a visible disability, they're not going to know what in particular you need. So you need to articulate that if you require a change. So to provide an accommodation, an employer first needs to know there's a barrier or an issue, and you're the only person that can tell the employer that. Now, you're not legally obliged to tell them anything unless there's two things where you do need to. It's related to your health and safety or the health and safety of people in the organization. So if you having a disability isn't going to endanger, let's say you have low vision and you want to apply for a TTC driver, you need to tell people because you won't be able to see clearly enough. So that would be your health and safety, the passenger's health and safety, coworkers, or whether it affects your ability to do the job. Okay, so in both those cases, you do need to disclose, but otherwise it's your own option on whether you choose to or not. And there's really no right or wrong. If you do decide to disclose, are you doing it if and when you mean to? So sometimes we unintentionally disclose. So let's say on our resume, we list all the volunteer organizations that we've worked with, and every one of them is a disability related organization. Somebody again might infer, rightly or wrongly, that you have a connection to disability. Then if we post on social media, remember information can be shared and copied and forwarded. Now, I don't think it matters if you do or you don't, but I do think you want to have a consistent approach. So it doesn't make sense to openly, disclose on social media and then go into an interview, not disclose. The employer goes and looks at your social media and goes, why is that inconsistent? It's your right to do it, but when people are applying for jobs, employers like consistency and transparency. And again, if you decide to disclose, I want you to talk as much about your abilities as your disability. Now, it's really a personal decision whether or not you choose to disclose. And it's affected by a lot of different factors. So it can be affected whether your disability is visible or invisible. So if you have a visible disability, the employer is going to find out at some point, probably in the interview process, that you have a disability. It might be good to let them know so that you can focus on doing the job and not have them focus on, oh, I didn't know this, I wasn't expecting this, right? We never want to have surprises in interviews. If you have an invisible disability, sometimes we can mask or conceal. That's not said in a pejorative way, like that's a bad thing. It's not, it's just a choice. I masked for many years. I concealed for many years because I wanted it to stay private. So that's perfectly reasonable. But in that case, if you're not going to do as well during an interview because you didn't get the accommodations you need, it might be worth considering whether the improvement in your performance by getting your accommodations is worthwhile disclosing. The type of disability can play into that. So do you have a stigmatized disability? And there are stigmatized disabilities still out there. The severity, so is it mild, moderate, or severe? Your health status, so if you have an episodic disability and you're currently, in a period of health, you may not choose to disclose until, you run into a change. Do you require an accommodation? And if you do, I'm going to tell you as an employer, or in the past, I've been an employer, but also as an employment counselor. If you require an accommodation for the interview, ask for it. It's going to help you be better. And that's, we hire people based on their ability to do the job. So if you need something that allows you to present yourself in a better way, a stronger way, ask for it. Unfortunately, a lot of us with a disability, when we've disclosed, have had negative past experiences. So that's not ideal. But remember, there's always employers out there who are looking to be accessible and inclusive. And finally, we might decide to disclose to some employers, but not to others. And that's okay as well. So context matters. Who's the employer? What's the job? What is the workplace environment? So that all those things can also affect disclosure. Okay, let's look at the logistics. What, when, who? Okay, so what do you disclose? Well, it's the information you choose to share, and it should at minimum say that I have a disability or health condition. If you don't say that, if you say I simply need a change, that's a preference. People don't attach it to a protected right under the Ontario Human Rights Code. So you need to state that you have a disability or health condition. When? Well, you can disclose it at any time or not at all. Okay, there's no right or wrong. A lot of it depends on what you're comfortable with. But you could disclose when applying, before an interview, during an interview, after an interview, after a job offer, after a trial period, or at any time. Maybe your health is changing and you need to suddenly disclose. Again, you're only legally required if it affects health and safety or doing the job properly. So I don't advocate for any particular one. I guess in average, I find in my experience as an employment counselor, most people opt to disclose if they have an invisible disability that they can mask. They generally choose to wait at least until after the job offer or a job trial. But again, if an accommodation would let you be better, perform better, then, ask for that accommodation up early. And who do you, disclose to? Well, you can disclose to the employer, your manager, your recruiter, your human resources rep, whoever it is that can help you get the accommodations that you need. All right, or is conducting the interview. Sometimes we also decide to share with our colleagues, but generally that's not the only people we disclose to, because they can't provide us an accommodation. So we might do it to build rapport or help people understand our situation. But generally we want to go to somebody in authority who has, the ability to help us talk about what we need changed in the workplace. Okay, how is really, really, really important. Okay, as important as the other. And I think we don't spend enough time on the how. So I want you to be aware of your tone, your body language, and what words you're using. So for most of us, when we disclose for the first time to someone outside our family or our friends or our medical professionals, we can be a little bit emotional. It's personal. And it probably comes where you faced a lot of challenges and barriers. So we want to practice so that we're not emotional with our employer. We just want to state, hi, I have a disability and these are the accommodations I need. Remember that it's a discussion, not a demand. It's not adversarial. The employer wants you to be able to do your job and you want to be able to do your job. So you have a common interest. And remember, your employer may be unfamiliar with your particular disability. Right? So don't get upset or frustrated if they don't know. Everybody can take some time to go away, learn a little bit more. And really, the only thing the employer needs to know about your disability is what you need changed. And that's where you're going to help them, because you should have a good idea of what you need changed in order to, do your job. And I'm going to talk about that, and that's the accommodations piece. Another thing that we don't often think about is, why are we disclosing? So sometimes it can make us feel better, or it can make us feel more authentic. And that's a valid reason for disclosing as well. Often it's to access the accommodation. Sometimes it's to get a barrier removed. Maybe, people seem to be displaying ableism, or are making jokes about people with disabilities that's making you uncomfortable. So maybe it's to educate or remove stigma. Those are all valid reasons. And that can sometimes help us frame the how and what we're going to say. There's a lot of good news to share when you're disclosing, and start always with your own abilities. I can do the job, I just need to do it differently. All right, so that's your abilities to do things. But in general, there's a lot of data that says that people with disabilities make great employees. In fact, in studies that compare them to employees without disabilities, 90% of employees with disabilities rate average or better on job performance. 98% rate average or better on safety. 86% rate average or better on attendance. And people with disabilities tend to stay in jobs longer. So it saves companies money on recruiting and training. So, it's great, but always start with your own particular strengths and skills, and that you are able to do the job. There are risks associated with disclosing. Some of them are fears, but some of those fears have been borne out, obviously, through people's personal anecdotes, experience, and through some of the studies that have been done. So the biggest fear, and I think the biggest barrier, is this unconscious bias and stigma we sometimes face when someone learns that you do things differently or you have a disability. There can be fear that the accommodation requests will be denied outright, or costs will be too high. We'll talk about that in a minute because there's some information you can share with your employers about that. And also by having a good idea of what you might need changed, you can go in prepared, knowing roughly what this might cost. Sometimes people fear negative consequences. I won't get the job, they won't promote me. You may feel that you're going to be treated differently, and you may fear that your information will not stay confidential. For that last one, if you want it to stay just between you and your boss, that is your right. You can simply ask them how they're going to maintain and keep confidentiality and keep your privacy, and how they'll, ensure that that happens. But there's also benefits to disclosing. And I like to spend time on this because for myself, it really changed how I worked in the workplace and how much I've enjoyed my job since I started disclosing. So first thing is, all that energy that you spent hiding or masking or concealing can now be spent in just doing your job like everybody else. And that's pretty freeing and pretty rewarding. So it's your right to be able to do a job. Accommodations can sometimes also make us more productive. So even if we could do the job without it, an accommodation might be the difference between an okay performance review and an excellent performance review. When we feel valued, it can positively impact job satisfaction, commitment, and productivity. And we saw that in some of the studies that I mentioned earlier. And it also allows companies to plan. Plan for, well, maybe everybody could benefit from sit-stand desks, or maybe everybody needs, noise canceling headsets. Okay. So knowing what you need is tricky, because if you've never worked, sometimes it will be much different than what you needed in, say, a post-secondary institution. So start by asking yourself, well, in the past, when I've either done a job, volunteer work, or even gone to school, what barriers or challenges have I encountered? And what's worked to help me address or remove those barriers or challenges? So that can be a really good place. So if noise bothered you in university or college, it's probably going to bother you in the workplace. If you needed extra time for some sorts of tasks, you're probably going to need additional time when you go to the workplace. So looking at what, your past experiences have been and projecting them forward, that can be beneficial as a place to start. Or you could simply go, what conditions do I thrive in? Do I really work well in? And that can be something. And then look and compare that to where you're going to be working. If you're not sure and you still have no idea, which is quite common, you could reach out to an employment counselor or a career counselor at the George Brown Career Center. You could go to the Accessibility Center. You could reach out to a disability consultant or specialist from perhaps an organization that works with people that share a disability that you have. And a really good source, if you just want to do some online research, is the Job Accommodation Network's searchable online accommodation resource. And the acronym is SOAR. And I've put the link into this deck. Look it up and you can search by job type, like work environment, by function, by disability. It's a really, really great tool to at least give you some ideas. Now, you're not going to get every accommodation they list, but you could look through and go, wow, that might actually really help me. Once you remember that accommodations aren't extra, they're not special treatment, they are your right, and that's a protected right. They allow you to do your job, and standards aren't lowered. You're still going to do the job, you just might do it slightly differently or with different tools. You can ask for accommodations across a lot of different areas. So that, and an accommodation can be removing a barrier or making a change. Okay, it takes two forms. So it could be, for instance, having someone come in to train about disability, so that, you start addressing assumptions people are making or unconscious bias. You could have changes to the way you communicate, and that could be as simple as asking someone to slow down, to something that's a little bit more involved, like having an American Sign Language interpreter. It could be closed captions, large print. It could be asking people to repeat information. It could be a magnifying glass if you're like me and you are getting older and you need a little bit of help reading. So it could be very, very simple. Could be checklists, meeting with your boss more frequently. It could be an accessible website. Then there's also, we can provide tools or assistive devices. So this is actually an assistive device, a very simple one. But there could be things like screen magnification software, voice to text or text to voice software. It could be something like a sit-stand desk or an ergonomic chair or keyboard. Those are all tools that help people in different ways with their disabilities. There's more than I can list here, but I'm just trying to give you some general ideas. We can also make changes to work environments and spaces. So for instance, perhaps you use a mobility aid and you need a wider aisle. Right? The desks are crammed too close, you have difficulty navigating the space, so we simply widen the aisle. Or perhaps you have a digestive issue and you need to be located closer to a washroom. That's also an accommodation. Perhaps you have seasonal affective disorder and you need a special light or lamp in the winter months, or to be closer to a window. Again, those are all changes to our work environment and spaces. I just recently learned in the last 3 years that noise bothers me. It was never a problem because I've always had a private office. But when I moved into an open concept area, it quickly became apparent that I needed noise canceling headsets. So even later in our life, when we've got a head full of gray hair, we may learn new things that we need in order to be accommodated. And finally, there can be changes to processes. This one's harder for a lot of people to imagine, but for instance, a process might be the interview process. So perhaps we don't do well with panel interviews, or we find it difficult to navigate between rooms for an interview. Or perhaps we have a speech difference and it's going to take us longer to answer questions. So asking for additional time, for a support person to be present, or even a different style of interview are all types of accommodations that might change processes. We could also have or require a different training process when we onboard. All right, so there's many different ways that, processes in the company could be unintentionally creating barriers, and we may need to ask for accommodations. Some examples of accommodations would be, perhaps we have someone who is deaf who wishes to be a customer service agent. The issue is not the disability, it's the barrier is that somebody is communicating differently. So perhaps it could be remote virtual work so that there's not the element of spoken language. Perhaps we could just simply communicate via writing or captions or an ASL interpreter. Those could all be potential accommodations. Again, not all of them, but there's just some suggestions. Perhaps we're a job seeker who's been diagnosed with anxiety and we're worried about the interview. And so the barrier is the style of interview that's being created. So we might ask for more time, or that they're, to be not having a timed assessment included. Or perhaps just having the questions written down or provided beforehand would alleviate some of the stress and anxiety and let us perform better. For somebody who has chronic back pain, the barrier might be the type of workstation and the work hours. And as the day goes on, the pain makes them more and more uncomfortable, hard to concentrate. So some potential accommodations could be an ergonomic assessment, a sit-stand desk, or even frequent stretching. You know, at the top of every hour, stand up and do a stretch for 5 minutes. All right. If you have a disability and you want to disclose, I'm going to encourage you to practice with your career center or a trusted friend or family member. But practice, because doing it the first time can be, like I said, quite an emotional event. And we want to make sure that we present ourselves as professional and that we present ourselves in the best manner possible. So simply state that you have a disability or health condition. Discuss how an accommodation will let you do the job, or, you know, what the barrier or challenge you're facing is. And then you're simply going to have a discussion with the employer until you agree on what is a realistic suggestion. So let's see what that would look like. For somebody with a learning disability, it might go something like this. I have a disability. I learn differently than other people, so I need an accommodation. In the past, extra time during training allows me to learn the material well. I'd also appreciate some one-on-one time with the trainer to ask them questions. The employer, then you have a discussion, and the employer might go, well, you know, how much time do you need? And, you know, how much time do you need with the trainer? And you'll have a discussion back and forth, and you'll, you know, give feedback where you know, because you're the expert in yourself, and then you're going to come to an agreement, which you're going to write down. And so in this case, in the example I've given, it's yes, I think an additional week would help. I'm happy to come in early every shift to complete the paid training. So again, you want to outline. So in this agreement, there's an additional week. The employer is going to pay for it, and the employee is going to come in early. Now, that might not be the accommodations you receive. You've got to negotiate with your employer on that, but you know, that would be a positive resolution. And if after the end of a week, you need another week, you could simply come back and say, I think some additional time would be helpful. Okay. You need to tailor your message when you're disclosing. So again, you may choose to disclose to some employers, but not to others. Again, what's your goal? Is it an accommodation? Do you want to educate or explain, or is this just to make you feel comfortable? All those are, again, valid reasons. Always continue to emphasize your strengths and your qualities. This is called an asset-based approach. And practice disclosing with someone you trust to give you honest feedback. Here's some strategies if you are going to disclose. Ask to meet somewhere private and comfortable. Probably, you know, minimum of 15 minutes, maybe as much as 30 minutes. Be aware of your body language and your tone. You don't want to sound defensive, but you also don't want to sound aggrieved. Clearly identify what the barrier is. So is it the training style? Is it, you know, that you require some assistive technology? Suggest options, but avoid ultimatums. Like, I have to have this, and this is the only software that I will accept. Because this is a discussion. The employer has to provide you with accommodation, but the employer decides what it is, what the accommodation will be. So we want to work together. Answer any questions, and if you don't know, both of you can go back and do some research. You can always reach out to us. We can send you to a right place, or visit our website. There's links on there to different accommodations. Agree on next steps and how you're going to follow up with a timeline. And then once you've agreed on that, write it down. And generally it's written down into what's called an accommodation plan. After you disclose, an employer may have questions, okay? They might ask you, well, what do you think would work? So it's good to have a few suggestions in hand. They might also say, well, you know, Lacey, you told me that you can't lift. How much can you lift? Is it nothing? Is it 5 pounds? Is it 10 pounds? How often do you need to sit down, right? And these are what are called functional limitations, or restrictions. And if the employer feels that in order to provide you with an appropriate accommodation, they need more information, they can ask you for a doctor's note. They pay for it, you go get it, but they're still not entitled to know the medical condition or the diagnosis. So it would be, Lacey has a lifting restriction. She cannot lift above 25 pounds. She cannot lift over her head. She cannot raise her arms. Okay, the doctor would write all that out, but they wouldn't say what Lacey's diagnosis is. Like I said, the employer decides on the accommodation. So we want to be flexible. We want to offer suggestions. This is a discussion. The employer must provide an accommodation, but gets to decide what the accommodation will be. However, if the accommodation is not working, you do have the right to go back to the employer and say, it's still not working really, really well. And the employer wants it to work well. They want you to do a good job. So this can be an ongoing conversation, and it can take a while to figure out what is the appropriate accommodation. Have it written down and subsequent changes written down, and review it, once a year or twice a year to make sure it's still working for you. Because sometimes as we age or our condition changes, the accommodations might need to change. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to tell, thank you. If you want to learn more information, you can reach out to Elizabeth Novak at occ.ca or Boyan Mitrovic at occ.ca. I'm going to encourage you to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. And we do have a list of all the sources we use to create this material. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you very much for participating in today's session.
Thank you so much.